Spring 1940. As the formidable Nazi panzer divisions advanced relentlessly across France and the German Luftwaffe asserted its aerial dominance over European skies, a visionary 45-year-old engineer named Edgar Schmid occupied a confined office at North American Aviation in Inglewood, California. There, he meticulously drafted the preliminary designs for what would ultimately emerge as the most pivotal fighter aircraft of the Second World War. However, an extraordinary aspect of this endeavor was its unsolicited nature. No official request had been made for its creation. The U.S. Army Air Corps had neither extended a contract nor even subtly indicated a desire for a novel fighter plane. Schmid proceeded solely on the basis of a calculated gamble, understanding that any misstep would force his company to absorb the substantial development expenses, likely leading to his own professional displacement. Edgar Schmid's personal narrative unfolds with the dramatic flair of a cinematic production, yet it is entirely factual. Born in Hagen, Germany, in 1899, his formative years were marked by witnessing the pioneering aerial demonstrations of the Wright brothers across Europe, instilling in him an enduring fascination with aviation. Following the conclusion of World War I, he secured employment with Fokker in Holland, indeed, the very Fokker renowned for constructing the legendary Red Baron's triplane. When the Great Depression descended, he immigrated to the United States in 1930, possessing little more than his engineering blueprints and an unyielding ambition. By 1936, he had joined North American Aviation, a burgeoning Californian enterprise primarily engaged in manufacturing training aircraft. At this juncture, they were not the established giants like Lockheed or Boeing. They were decidedly the underdogs in the aerospace industry. In April 1940, a critical juncture arrived when the British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation with an urgent appeal. Great Britain was experiencing a devastating depletion of its aircraft fleet, far exceeding its factory's capacity for replacement, necessitating an immediate and substantial influx of new fighters. Their request was for North American to produce Curtiss P-40 Warhawks under a licensing agreement, a conventional and financially secure arrangement. Yet, the company's president, James Dutch Kindleberger, alongside Schmid, perceived this as an unparalleled opportunity to significantly advance beyond their competitors. Schmid presented the British representatives with an audaciously bold proposition. "We possess the capability to engineer a superior fighter from its foundational design within a mere 120 days. The British found his claim incredulous, and even his own colleagues regarded him as irrational. The prevailing wisdom dictated, "One does not conceive a combat aircraft in 4 months. Such a feat demands years of extensive testing, meticulous wind tunnel analysis, and the inevitable failures of prototypes." Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Where are you from, and what do you think about the video topic? However, Schmid had been covertly engaged in developing advanced fighter concepts for several months, driven by an unyielding obsession with a singular, pervasive challenge afflicting every fighter aircraft of that era: operational range. The iconic Spitfire, while undeniably brilliant in aerial combat, was hampered by a limited fuel capacity, restricting its effective radius to approximately 400 miles. Conversely, the P-40 offered a respectable range, but lacked the necessary rate of climb. German Bf-109s, while lethal interceptors, were tethered to their airfields by their diminutive fuel tanks. Every air force globally confronted this harsh, inescapable compromise: the ability to construct either an agile, nimble fighter or a long-range fighter, but never both simultaneously. The immutable laws of physics seemingly precluded such a combination. Yet, Schmid harbored a conviction that these physical constraints could be circumvented through an innovative wing design. The British, in their desperate circumstances and with dwindling alternatives, formalized the contract on May 29, 1940, stipulating a 120-day timeframe for the delivery of the first prototype. This deadline was universally considered an impossible undertaking. Schmid swiftly assembled a dedicated team comprising 150 engineers and draftsmen, who then operated in relentless 24-hour shifts, rotating crews to maintain continuous progress. His true strategic advantage, however, extended beyond mere caffeine and sheer determination. It lay in his access to invaluable data from NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. This esteemed organization had been conducting pioneering research and testing on a revolutionary wing configuration known as a laminar flow airfoil. Schmid was on the verge of staking his entire professional trajectory on the efficacy of this design, not merely within the controlled environment of a wind tunnel, but under the extreme pressures of combat, at speeds approaching 400 miles per hour, while under enemy fire. On October 26, 1940, a mere 178 days subsequent to the British contract signing, test pilot Vance Breeze expertly lifted the inaugural NA-73X prototype from the runway at Mines Field in Los Angeles. The aircraft evinced a remarkable lightness, responsiveness, and an almost eager disposition. Breeze skillfully maneuvered it through a series of rolls and climbs, and upon landing, he conveyed a sentiment that engineers universally aspire to hear. This machine handles with the precision and agility of a sports car. Within a matter of weeks, the British officially christened it the Mustang, and initial operational reports appeared to unequivocally validate Schmid's seemingly impossible gamble. The aircraft demonstrated exceptional speed, achieving 390 miles per hour in level flight, surpassing nearly every other contender in the sky. It was notably smooth in operation and inherently stable. However, the true limitations became brutally apparent when pilots subsequently engaged the aircraft at combat altitudes in early 1942, as Royal Air Force squadrons began receiving their Mustang deliveries. Below an altitude of 15,000 feet, the aircraft performed magnificently. RAF pilots effectively deployed them for ground attack and reconnaissance missions, executing devastating strafing runs against German supply columns in France. Yet, the instant it ascended above 15,000 feet, the Mustang underwent a dramatic transformation, devolving from a thoroughbred into a struggling cart horse. The engine began to wheeze, and its acceleration capabilities plummeted. In a high-altitude dogfight against formidable adversaries, like the Messerschmitt Bf-109 or the Focke-Wulf FW-190, the Mustang became an easy target, effectively a sitting duck. Pilots began to disparagingly refer to it as a low-altitude sports car trapped in a high-altitude war. The primary culprit was identified as the Allison V1710 engine, an exquisitely engineered piece of American machinery that, unfortunately, possessed one critical design flaw: its reliance on a single-stage, single-speed supercharger. To elucidate this without delving into a comprehensive engineering discourse, it is essential to understand that at higher altitudes, the ambient air density decreases, resulting in less available oxygen for the engine's combustion process. A supercharger functions essentially as an air compressor, forcibly introducing a greater volume of oxygen into the engine cylinders. The Allison supercharger performed adequately at sea level and moderate altitudes, delivering a respectable 1,150 horsepower. However, above 15,000 feet, the operational zone for the majority of European aerial combat, this supercharger proved incapable of compressing a sufficient quantity of air. Consequently, the engine's power output plummeted to approximately 900 horsepower. In stark contrast, German fighter aircraft, equipped with sophisticated two-stage superchargers, were able to sustain full power output up to 25,000 feet. In the context of a dogfight, horsepower directly translates into tactical options, superior speed, enhanced climb rate, and the crucial ability to either evade or pursue an adversary. The Mustang, despite its beautifully optimized aerodynamics, lacked the necessary brute force to leverage these advantages where it mattered most. American pilots experienced this deficiency firsthand, and often under dire circumstances. The U.S. Army Air Forces initially relegated their P-51s to low-level reconnaissance assignments, effectively mirroring the role the RAF had reluctantly adopted. Photo reconnaissance Mustangs would scream across enemy territory at treetop level, relying on their speed and the element of surprise to avoid engaging enemy fighters rather than confronting them directly. This was a profoundly humiliating outcome for an aircraft that had initially shown such immense promise. Engineers at Wright Field in Ohio conducted countless tests, meticulously adjusting fuel mixtures and supercharger gearing. However, it became clear that one cannot extract performance that simply does not exist within the fundamental design. The Allison engine was simply not conceived for the rigors of high-altitude combat. North American Aviation's brilliantly designed airframe was being severely constrained by an underpowered core. By the middle of 1942, the Mustang program appeared increasingly to be an exorbitantly expensive miscalculation. The U.S. Army had placed orders for thousands of these aircraft. Yet, what utility could be found in a fighter that was incapable of operating effectively at the altitudes where bomber formations flew? B-17 flying fortresses were enduring catastrophic losses over Germany, with dozens of aircraft being destroyed per mission because their fighter escorts, primarily P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings, were compelled to abandon their charges before reaching deeply situated targets. The bombers would then proceed unaccompanied, becoming vulnerable prey for Luftwaffe fighters, which would mercilessly tear into them like wolves attacking sheep. The consensus was clear. The urgent requirement was for a long-range, high-altitude escort fighter. The Mustang possessed the requisite range and an exceptional airframe, but it unequivocally lacked the necessary altitude performance. Schmidt's seemingly impossible design was, quite literally, dying of oxygen starvation. The pivotal solution emerged from an unexpected source: a British test pilot named Ronald Harker, who happened to be visiting North American Aviation's Inglewood factory in April 1942. Harker, an experienced pilot for Rolls-Royce, was accustomed to flying Spitfires and testing various engine and performance modifications. When he entered a Mustang cockpit for a demonstration flight, he immediately recognized a critical deficiency that American engineers had, for some inexplicable reason, overlooked. The airframe was extraordinary, surpassing anything he had previously flown, but it was conspicuously struggling for adequate air at altitude. The moment he landed, Harker dispatched an urgent telegram to Rolls-Royce headquarters in Derby, England. This message contained 5 words that would fundamentally alter the course of the war. Flight testing Mustang needs Merlin engine. The Rolls-Royce Merlin was far more than a mere engine. It was the formidable power plant that had already cemented the legendary status of Spitfires and Lancaster bombers. Crucially, it incorporated a sophisticated two-stage, two-speed supercharger system that effectively maintained engine power up to an altitude of 30,000 feet. The engineering behind this system was intricate. The first stage of the supercharger compressed the incoming air. An intercooler then reduced its temperature to enhance density. Subsequently, The second stage compressed the air once more before forcing it into the cylinders. This intricate setup yielded an impressive 1,520 horsepower at 20,000 feet, nearly doubling the Allison's output at that same altitude. However, the process of swapping engines is considerably more complex than merely replacing a car battery. The Merlin was heavier, necessitated distinct mounting configurations, and demanded completely redesigned engine mounts, cooling systems, and propeller assemblies. Rolls-Royce, demonstrating remarkable foresight and initiative, did not await American authorization. By October 1942, they had procured a Mustang from RAF inventory and ingeniously integrated a Merlin 61 engine into its airframe at their Hucknall facility. The inaugural test flight occurred on October 13, 1942, with Rolls-Royce test pilot Captain Ronnie Shepard at the controls. Shepard ascended to 20,000 feet, anticipating the customary sluggish response. Instead, the Mustang surged forward as if it had been liberated from restraints. He propelled it to 25,000 feet, observing that it continued to climb robustly. Even at 30,000 feet, the engine maintained a powerful pull. When he initiated a dive and opened the throttle, the airspeed indicator registered an astonishing 433 miles per hour. Shepard landed and subsequently filed a report replete with descriptors such as phenomenal and revolutionary. The British promptly designated this modified aircraft the Mustang X and assigned it the highest priority. It was deemed a matter of utmost urgency. Across the Atlantic, in the United States, North American Aviation and the Army Air Forces were engaged in a frantic effort to bridge a perceived technological gap. Whispers had reached their ears concerning the impressive trials of the British Merlin engine, and by November 1942, Wright Field had received performance data that seemed almost fantastical. The figures indicated an astonishing 50-mile-per-hour increase in speed and a dramatic ascent in service ceiling, soaring from 31,000 feet to an unprecedented 41,900 feet. Understandably, some engineers harbored suspicions of measurement inaccuracies. Nevertheless, the inaugural American-built Merlin-powered Mustang, officially designated XP-51B, took to the skies on November 30, 1942, departing from Inglewood. Test pilot Bob Chilton meticulously put the aircraft through its demanding paces, his voice crackling over the radio with barely suppressed exhilaration, proclaiming, "This thing climbs like a homesick angel." The metamorphosis was nothing short of absolute. The very airframe that had previously struggled to perform adequately above 15,000 feet now asserted clear dominance at 25,000 feet and demonstrated formidable combat effectiveness even at altitudes approaching 35,000 feet. In Detroit, the Packard Motor Company commenced the licensed production of Merlin engines, specifically the Packard V1650-3, which was essentially an American-manufactured Merlin, albeit with modified tooling optimized for large-scale production. By the initial months of 1943, P-51B Mustangs, now equipped with these potent Merlin engines, were steadily rolling off the assembly lines at both the Inglewood facility and a newly established factory in Dallas, Texas. In contrast, the earlier Allison engine Mustangs were quietly relegated to less glamorous roles, primarily ground attack and reconnaissance missions. The definitive Mustang, the formidable aircraft destined to escort Allied bombers deep into enemy territory, all the way to Berlin and safely back, had at long last arrived. Edgar Schmud's meticulously designed airframe had finally received the powerful heart it deserved, and the German Luftwaffe was soon to experience firsthand the devastating capabilities unleashed by 1,500 horsepower coupled with innovative laminar flow wings in the hands of resolute Allied pilots. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Now, let us delve into the true ingenuity that rendered Schmidt's design so profoundly revolutionary: the wing itself. This is often the point where the uninitiated listener's gaze tends to drift as engineers begin to articulate complex concepts such as boundary layer and Reynolds numbers. However, I urge you to remain attentive, for understanding this element is precisely what differentiates a merely capable fighter from an utterly legendary one. As any aircraft traverses the air, its wing inevitably drags air molecules along its surface. Under conventional circumstances, this interaction generates turbulent airflow. One might visualize this as a myriad of tiny whirlpools and chaotic eddies swirling unpredictably across the wing's contours. Such turbulent air translates directly into drag, and drag, in essence, means that precious fuel is being expended merely to overcome the resistance of the air itself. Schmidt's paramount objective was to eradicate as much of this detrimental turbulence as humanly possible. This imperative led to the adoption of the NACA 45-100 series laminar flow airfoil, a groundbreaking innovation conceived by the brilliant engineer Eastman Jacobs at the Langley Research Center in Virginia during the twilight years of the 1930s. Jacobs had dedicated countless hours to extensive wind tunnel studies, meticulously observing the intricate dynamics of air movement over various wing surfaces. Through this exhaustive research, he unearthed a discovery that defied conventional aerodynamic wisdom. Most aircraft wings of the 1930s typically featured their thickest point positioned approximately 25 to 30% after the leading edge. Jacobs, however, radically repositioned this point of maximum thickness much further back, to 45%, effectively almost halfway along the wing chord. This seemingly minor, yet profoundly significant, alteration in geometry generated a distinct pressure gradient that was instrumental in maintaining a smooth, laminar airflow, meaning the air molecules flowed in orderly, parallel layers rather than a chaotic, swirling mass, for a considerably greater distance across the wing's surface. The empirical data gleaned from testing was nothing short of astonishing. Wind tunnel evaluations unequivocally demonstrated that these innovative laminar flow wings could diminish drag by an impressive 30 to 40% when compared to traditional airfoils operating at typical cruise speeds. A reduction of 30% in drag fundamentally alters an aircraft's capabilities, enabling it to cover the same distance with substantially less fuel consumption, or, alternatively, to carry a greater fuel load and consequently fly dramatically farther. However, and this aspect is absolutely critical, laminar flow can only be sustained if the wing surface remains impeccably smooth. We are speaking of imperfections measurable in mere thousandths of an inch. A single protruding rivet head, the residue of an insect impact, or even a subtly textured paint finish could instantly disrupt the delicate laminar airflow, causing it to transition into turbulence and thereby completely negating the hard-won aerodynamic advantage. A significant number of engineers at the time considered it an insurmountable challenge to maintain such exacting precision in the context of mass production, let alone under the harsh realities of combat conditions, where bullet holes and makeshift battlefield repairs were commonplace. Schmidt, however, possessed an almost obsessive focus on manufacturing tolerances that were considered utterly impractical, even insane, for the production standards of 1940. North American aviation consequently pioneered sophisticated flush riveting techniques, ensuring that rivet heads sat perfectly level with the wing skin, rather than creating any minuscule protrusion. They employed specialized jigs and fixtures that secured wing panels to remarkably tight tolerances, typically within plus or minus 0.05 inches. Production workers meticulously hand-sanded wing surfaces and applied multiple layers of primer and paint, wet sanding between each successive coat until the surface achieved a glass-like smoothness. Quality inspectors were famously rigorous, frequently rejecting wings that other aircraft manufacturers would have readily deemed flawless. This painstaking attention to detail undeniably added both time and financial cost to the production process, yet the extraordinary performance results of the P-51 spoke volumes about the wisdom of these stringent measures. The P-51's inherent internal fuel capacity initially stood at 269 gallons, a figure later augmented to a formidable 489 gallons, with the inclusion of external drop tanks. This translated directly into an effective combat radius of 750 miles, signifying that the Mustang possessed the capability to fly 750 miles, engage in aerial combat for a full 20 minutes, and then safely return to its base. To put this into perspective, a Spitfire Mark IX, a highly regarded contemporary fighter, possessed an internal fuel capacity of merely 85 gallons, affording it a combat radius of barely 400 miles. Similarly, the robust P-47 Thunderbolt, with its 305-gallon internal capacity, could only manage a combat radius of 475 miles. The Mustang was not simply a marginal improvement. It fundamentally belonged to an entirely different class of aircraft. And herein lies the truly elegant aspect of its design. Precisely because the laminar flow wing operated with such exceptional efficiency at cruise speeds, the Mustang paradoxically achieved greater range by flying faster. At a cruise speed of 280 miles per hour, its fuel consumption was so remarkably economical that the addition of external tanks transformed it into an indispensable strategic weapon. Bomber crews, who had long endured the terrifying vulnerability of unescorted flights deep over enemy territory, affectionately began to refer to the Mustangs as "little friends," because, for the first time in the relentless air war over Europe, these steadfast escorts could remain with them all the way to their distant targets and then faithfully accompany them on the perilous journey home. The date was March 4, 1944. 64 P-51B Mustangs belonging to the 4th Fighter Group ascended from Debden Airfield in England at precisely 10:15 in the morning, their wings laden with heavy 110-gallon drop tanks. The mission briefing had been delivered with stark clarity: escort the B-17 bombers to Berlin and ensure their safe return. Berlin, the very capital of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich, lay an arduous 1,100-mile round trip deep within enemy territory, a destination where no Allied fighter had ever dared to venture. The veteran bomber crews harbored deep skepticism, having witnessed far too many escort fighters courteously waggle their wings in a gesture of apology before peeling away at the German border, their dwindling fuel gauges compelling them to turn homeward, leaving the vulnerable bombers exposed to the relentless assaults of Luftwaffe interceptors. But this particular mission, they were assured, would be fundamentally different. Lieutenant Colonel Don Blakesley, a seasoned combat veteran who had previously flown Spitfires with the Royal Air Force before transferring to American squadrons, commanded the formation. Blakesley possessed a profound understanding of the mission's immense strategic implications. If Mustangs could indeed penetrate to Berlin, it meant the Luftwaffe would have no sanctuary left to exploit. German fighter units had consistently retreated deeper into Reich territory, operating from airfields they had long considered impervious to American fighter escorts. Berlin, therefore, represented both the psychological and practical nexus of German air defense. The ability to engage in combat over Berlin would signify the capacity to fight effectively anywhere within the Reich. The weather that day was a testament to typical March hardship. Thick, oppressive clouds shrouded the English Channel, and severe icing conditions prevailed at altitude. Several Mustangs were forced to abort the mission due to various mechanical malfunctions, but the bulk of the formation resolutely pressed onward. They breached German airspace at a cruising altitude of 27,000 feet, their throttles carefully set to an efficient cruise speed, meticulously conserving every precious gallon of fuel. The vast bomber stream, comprising 316 B-17s, stretched for miles across the sky, their objective a critical ball-bearing factory situated in Erkner, just beyond the outskirts of Berlin. Around 11:40, near the city of Brunswick, the initial wave of Luftwaffe fighters materialized, Messerschmitt Bf 109GS and Focke-Wulf FW-190 as, aggressively diving from above. Ordinarily, by this geographical point, the escort fighters would have already departed, but on this momentous day, the Mustangs were still present, their unexpected presence causing the German pilots to visibly hesitate. Years of ingrained operational habit informed them that American fighters simply should not be operating this far to the east. That crucial moment of hesitation proved costly. The Mustangs swiftly broke formation and engaged, executing tight turns inside the German fighters' arcs, leveraging their superior speed at altitude to dictate the terms of engagement. Captain Don Gentile, a formidable ace, swiftly shot down two Bf-109s within a mere 3 minutes, skillfully exploiting the Mustang's exceptional climb rate to gain advantageous positions above his adversaries, and then employing gravity-assisted dives. The very laminar flow wings that Schmutt had so obsessively perfected allowed the Mustang to maintain precise control at speeds where other fighter aircraft would typically begin to buffet and shake uncontrollably. German pilots found themselves in the unprecedented and deeply disconcerting position of being simultaneously outrun and outclimbed by their American counterparts. The ensuing furball, as pilots colloquially termed a chaotic, tangled dogfight, dispersed across an expansive 50-mile stretch of German sky. Yet, the paramount fact remained unchanged. The B-17 bombers continued their determined trajectory toward Berlin, and the Mustangs steadfastly maintained their protective screen. At 12:15, the formation penetrated Berlin's heavily defended airspace. Flak batteries immediately erupted, filling the sky with ominous black bursts of exploding anti-aircraft shells. However, the prevailing weather conditions, ironically, worked to the Allies' advantage. The cloud cover was so dense and pervasive that the German anti-aircraft gunners were forced to fire blindly. The B-17s released their bomb loads through the thick clouds, relying on radar guidance, and then turned for home. The Mustang pilots meticulously checked their fuel gauges. They had expended the contents of their external drop tanks and were now operating on internal fuel, but their carefully calculated flight plan indicated that the remaining fuel was sufficient. The return leg would be flown at an optimal cruise speed, with no unnecessary maneuvering, maintaining a direct course homeward. By 14:30, the entire formation had successfully traversed back over the North Sea. A mere 30 minutes later, by 1500 hours, their wheels were gently touching down at various English airfields. The mission statistics, when compiled, eloquently narrated the full story. 5 bombers had been lost, primarily to enemy flak. The Luftwaffe, in their post-mission reports, claimed to have destroyed 11 Mustangs, but the actual American losses amounted to 5 aircraft, with 3 of their pilots fortunately rescued. American fighters, in turn, claimed 13 German aircraft destroyed. However, the true triumph of this mission transcended mere kill ratios. Its profound significance lay in its overwhelming psychological impact. Luftwaffe pilots, disbelieving, radioed their controllers with incredulous reports. American fighters over Berlin. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, the supreme commander of the Luftwaffe, is famously reported to have remarked, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." The long-cherished myth of Fortress Germany had been irrevocably shattered at 27,000 feet, a monumental achievement made possible by the visionary, and once deemed impossible, wing design of Edgar Schmid. Schmid's revolutionary wing design was not merely about reaching distant targets. It was also intrinsically linked to the Mustang's capacity for survival and dominance in aerial combat. In 1944, German aviators were far from novices. Many were seasoned aces, hardened by extensive combat experience from the Battle of Britain to the Eastern Front. Their aircraft, like the Messerschmitt Bf 109G, were meticulously engineered for high-altitude interception, boasting impressive speeds of 400 miles per hour and climb rates of 3,100 feet per minute. The Focke-Wulf FW-198 presented an even more formidable challenge, a robust radial engine fighter renowned for its resilience to damage and unparalleled roll rate. On paper, these German fighters appeared to be formidable adversaries, yet in practical engagements, the Mustang consistently outmaneuvered and outperformed them, often making even the most experienced German pilots appear inexperienced. The P-51D, introduced in mid-1944 and featuring a distinctive bubble canopy offering an unobstructed 360-degree view, achieved a maximum speed of 437 miles per hour at an altitude of 25,000 feet. While this speed was impressive, it did not overwhelmingly surpass that of its German counterparts. The Mustang's true tactical advantage, however, lay in its exceptional climb rate of 3,200 feet per minute. In the heat of a dogfight, with the powerful Merlin engine engaged at war emergency power, the aircraft that gained the superior altitude first invariably controlled the engagement. This positional advantage allowed pilots to initiate a dive, leveraging gravity to augment their speed, dictate the terms of engagement, and disengage by climbing away if circumstances turned unfavorable. German pilots frequently discovered that while their aircraft could initially match the Mustang's ascent, the American fighters continued to climb effortlessly even as their own engines struggled for oxygen. The Merlin engine's two-stage supercharger proved vastly superior, performing more efficiently at 28,000 feet than any system the Luftwaffe possessed. Furthermore, turn performance, a critical differentiator between good and great fighters, was another area where Schmid's laminar flow wing excelled. We sincerely hope you are enjoying this detailed exploration of the Mustang's unparalleled design and combat legacy. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video for more insights. We would be truly grateful for your like and subscription, as your support helps us continue creating content like this. Also, feel free to leave a comment below about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The Mustang was capable of sustaining a tight turn radius of approximately 1,200 feet at 300 miles per hour without significant energy loss, allowing it to execute swift, tight maneuvers while retaining its speed. In contrast, the Focke-Wulf FW-190 typically required a wider turning circle. Although the Messerschmitt Bf 109 could initially execute tighter turns, it rapidly bled speed, leaving its pilot vulnerable. American pilots quickly learned to exploit these characteristics. If a Messerschmitt managed to get on a Mustang's tail, the American pilot would initiate a climbing spiral turn. The 109 would attempt to follow, with both aircraft enduring perhaps 4 or 5 gs, a force sufficient to induce a temporary graying of vision at the periphery. However, the Mustang consistently maintained its energy state more effectively. After just 2 complete turns, the 109 would be noticeably sluggish, slow, and exposed, whereas the Mustang would still possess ample speed to reverse the engagement. The ability to dive at high speed also proved critically important when combat situations deteriorated. The Mustang received official clearance for dives reaching speeds of up to 505 miles per hour, though pilots frequently surpassed this limit while pursuing retreating German jet aircraft. The airframe maintained remarkable structural integrity throughout these high-speed maneuvers, exhibiting no wing flutter or control surface lockup. Schmidt's design ingeniously incorporated structural strength into every component through stress skin construction, a method where the aluminum skin itself bore aerodynamic loads, rather than relying solely on internal frameworks. German fighters, particularly the 109, often encountered issues with elevator flutter during high-speed dives, compelling their pilots to exercise caution when exceeding 450 miles per hour. This critical 50 miles per hour difference meant that a diving Mustang could invariably intercept almost any fleeing adversary or evade nearly any pursuer. The Mustang's formidable firepower decisively sealed its combat superiority. The P-51D was armed with 6.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, positioned 3 in each wing, carrying a total of 1,800 rounds. Each weapon discharged 800 rounds per minute, and when set for a typical convergence range of 300 yards, all 6 streams of bullets converged into a cone of devastating destruction approximately 6 feet in diameter. A mere 2-second burst would unleash roughly 160 bullets into this destructive cone, targeting the relatively fragile structures of German fighters. This overwhelming firepower proved catastrophic. Pilots frequently reported observing enemy wings folding, tails separating, and cockpits disintegrating under the concentrated barrage of .50 caliber fire. The Mustang was not only faster and more agile, but also possessed a significantly harder hitting capability. German aces, who had survived years of intense combat, often found themselves outmatched by American pilots with as little as 50 hours of combat experience, simply because the Mustang provided these newcomers with the tools to compensate for their lack of seasoned expertise. This inherent quality, making the difficult appear effortless, is the true hallmark of exceptional engineering. This strategic shift in doctrine, combined with the Mustang's inherent capabilities, precipitated a statistical massacre in the skies. Between January 1944 and May 1945, P-51 Mustangs were officially credited with the destruction of 4,950 enemy aircraft, a higher total than any other Allied fighter in the European theater. This impressive tally included 4,131 aircraft shot down in aerial combat, and an additional 819 obliterated on the ground during strafing runs. However, raw kill numbers alone only partially convey the full narrative. It is crucial to examine the profound strategic impact these victories achieved. During the latter half of 1943, the 8th Air Force, which served as the primary American bomber contingent in England, suffered an average loss of 350 heavy bombers each month. This staggering figure translated to approximately 3,500 highly trained aircrew members either killed or captured every 30 days, a rate that was unequivocally unsustainable. Each B-17 or B-24 bomber represented 10 invaluable lives, hundreds of thousands of dollars in manufacturing costs, and many months of specialized crew training. The Luftwaffe was, in essence, winning the attrition war by forcing unescorted bombers to navigate a perilous gauntlet of concentrated fighter aircraft at critical choke points along their routes to vital German industrial targets. A particularly grim example occurred in October 1943, when a raid on Schweinfurt resulted in the loss of 60 bombers out of 291 dispatched, a devastating 20% loss rate that, if sustained, would have inevitably led to the collapse of the entire bombing campaign within a matter of months. The introduction of long-range P-51B escorts in December 1943 immediately and dramatically altered this grim mathematical equation. By March 1944, the bomber loss rates had plummeted to a mere 3.5% per mission. By June 1944, following the D-Day landings, when Mustang groups were frequently executing multiple daily missions, this rate further decreased to below 2%. The Luftwaffe did not suddenly become less proficient in combat. Rather, they were forced into an untenable strategic predicament. German fighter pilots faced an inescapable dilemma. They were compelled to engage the Allied bombers to thwart the relentless destruction of Reich industry. However, engaging these bomber formations meant confronting a formidable screen of Mustangs that possessed the range and capability to pursue them anywhere. Luftwaffe pilots began to report increasingly frequent situations where they would visually acquire bomber formations, but found themselves unable to initiate attacks because the Mustangs consistently maintained a decisive altitude advantage. The role of the escorts had unequivocally transitioned from a purely defensive posture to an aggressively offensive one. Ground attack missions further amplified the destructive capabilities of the Mustang, adding another critical dimension to its strategic impact. Once bomber formations were safely en route back to their bases, Mustang squadrons would descend to treetop level, actively seeking out targets of opportunity. These targets included locomotives, trucks, vital fuel depots, and enemy aircraft parked on airfields. The very same .50 caliber guns that could shred a fighter at high altitude proved equally devastating against the thin-skinned ground targets. German train engineers quickly learned to abandon their locomotives the moment they sighted approaching Mustangs, understanding that even a single strafing pass could reduce a steam engine to twisted scrap metal. In response, Luftwaffe airfields were forced to move aircraft into blast-proof revetments and disperse them across numerous satellite fields, a measure that only served to complicate maintenance and operational logistics. The Mustang effectively compelled the entire German air defense system into a perpetually reactive mode. The human and material cost, however, was not insignificant. The 8th Air Force sustained the loss of approximately 2,520 P-51s between 1943 and 1945, with roughly 1,300 pilots making the ultimate sacrifice. This represented a loss rate of about 33% against enemy aircraft destroyed, which, while a favorable exchange ratio, still incurred painful casualties. A significant number of these losses stemmed from anti-aircraft flak and ground fire during perilous low-level strafing runs, which constituted the most dangerous mission profile. Even a single rifle bullet penetrating the radiator could spell doom for a Mustang by causing critical coolant loss and subsequent engine failure. Yet, the strategic calculus, while brutal, was undeniably clear. The exchange of one highly trained fighter pilot for 2 or 3 German fighters, coupled with the invaluable saving of dozens of bomber crew lives, was a mathematically necessary equation for achieving victory in the war. By the spring of 1945, the Luftwaffe had been systematically ground down to a mere shadow of its former strength, operating sporadically with woefully inadequate fuel supplies and green pilots who possessed perhaps a mere 30 hours of flight training. While the Mustang did not single-handedly achieve air superiority, it undeniably rendered victory inevitable and accelerated its arrival by many months. The war concluded in May 1945, and most wartime aircraft designs swiftly faded into scrapyards or museums within a few years, as the future unequivocally belonged to jet propulsion. Everyone recognized this paradigm shift. The Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter had already demonstrably proven the obsolescence of piston engines, even though its arrival was too late to salvage Germany's war effort. Nevertheless, Edgar Schmidt's Mustang steadfastly refused to retire gracefully. The fundamental design principles embedded within its laminar flow wing and stressed skin fuselage continued to find novel applications long after its final combat mission over Europe. The subsequent narrative of the Mustang reveals a profound truth about truly revolutionary engineering. Exceptional design invariably transcends its initial intended purpose. When the Korean War erupted in June 1950, the newly independent Air Force suddenly found itself in urgent need of robust ground attack aircraft capable of operating from rudimentary forward airstrips and enduring heavy anti-aircraft fire. The jet aircraft of that era were notoriously temperamental, consumed vast quantities of fuel, and necessitated long, reinforced concrete runways. Consequently, the F-51D Mustang, which had been redesignated when the Air Force gained its independence in 1947, was swiftly brought out of mothballs and deployed to Korea within weeks. Pilots discovered that the aircraft performed ground attack missions with exceptional proficiency, carrying bombs, rockets, and napalm while absorbing battle damage that would have incapacitated a jet. The Mustang's reliable Merlin engine and robust airframe meant it could operate effectively from primitive strips located near the front lines. During the conflict, these venerable aircraft flew an astonishing 62,607 combat sorties in Korea, losing 351 aircraft primarily to ground fire. This was an extraordinary performance for a design that was already a decade old. However, the most astonishing aspect of its enduring operational life manifested in foreign military service. Less affluent countries often lacked the financial capacity for sophisticated jet fighters, or the complex logistical infrastructure required to maintain them. Yet, they could effectively deploy the Mustang with comparatively modest logistical requirements. For instance, the Israeli Air Force utilized its P-51DS during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, and kept these potent aircraft in active service until 1961. Even more remarkably, the Dominican Air Force continued to operate its Mustangs until 1984. Indeed, 1984, an astounding 44 years after the prototype's maiden flight. These were not static exhibits performing nostalgic air show demonstrations. Rather, they were frontline military assets actively engaged in border patrol and counterinsurgency missions. The sheer fact that developing nations' air forces managed to sustain the intricate Merlin engines with limited part supplies stands as a testament to the masterfully crafted and robust engineering of the entire aircraft package. Edgar Schmidt himself transitioned to new endeavors following the war. He subsequently joined North American's burgeoning jet programs, ultimately becoming the principal architect for the F-86 Sabre, the revolutionary swept-wing fighter that asserted supremacy over the Soviet MiG-15s during the Korean War. A close examination of the F-80SIX's engineering ethos reveals clear echoes of the Mustang's design philosophy, a pronounced emphasis on pilot visibility, optimized aerodynamics for superior performance, and extended operational range. While the Sabre was undeniably more than just a Mustang fitted with a jet engine, it inherited the same meticulous focus on drag reduction and structural efficiency that defined its piston-powered predecessor. Schmidt eventually retired in 1960 and passed away in 1985, having lived long enough to witness his seemingly impossible 1940 design still flying in combat 4 decades later, a profound and enduring legacy rarely afforded to engineers. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The technological reverberations extended far deeper than the influence on individual aircraft designs. The groundbreaking NACA 45-100 laminar flow airfoil, a design principle upon which Schmid effectively staked his professional future, became the bedrock for subsequent research into the supercritical wings now commonplace on modern commercial airliners. Engineers in the 1960s, diligently studying transonic flight, realized that these laminar flow principles could effectively postpone the onset of compressibility effects and shock wave formation at high subsonic speeds. Boeing notably implemented these insights into the design of its iconic 737 and 747 aircraft families, while Airbus employed similar concepts for its A320 family. Consequently, every time you board a commercial airliner that boasts impressive long-range capabilities and remarkable fuel efficiency, you are directly benefiting from the advanced aerodynamic principles that Edgar Schmid conclusively demonstrated could work, not merely in controlled wind tunnels, but under the extreme pressures of combat at 400 miles per hour with hostile fire. Ultimately, the P-51 Mustang provided a crucial, albeit often challenging, lesson for military procurement offices, that the optimal solution sometimes originates from an engineer nobody explicitly commissioned, addressing a problem through unforeseen methodologies, and adhering to an unfathomable schedule. Schmid's seemingly impossible 120-day deadline in 1940 yielded an aerial platform that profoundly shaped aeronautical engineering for 3 successive generations. This achievement transcends mere good engineering. It represents a precisely actualized foresight, executed with unwavering precision under immense, seemingly insurmountable pressure. The Allied bombers successfully reached Berlin and returned safely, in no small part, because one German immigrant steadfastly declined to concede that the laws of physics had already predetermined the limits of what was possible.